Imagine finding out that your degrees, your coding skills, your technical mastery, basically all the things you spent like 10,000 hours perfecting, only account for 15% of your actual success in life.
Right, which is just a wild statistic to process.
It really is. I mean, you spend your entire educational career hunched over a desk, mastering the math, memorizing all these granular details of your craft.
Yeah.
Right? You're operating under this widespread cultural myth of the lone genius.
Oh, totally. The idea that if you just build the best widget, the world will naturally beat a path to your door.
Exactly. But according to this massive benchmark study by the Carnegie Institute of Technology, that raw technical intelligence is, well, it's merely the baseline.
Yeah, it just gets you in the door.
Right. The other 85% of your professional success, your financial trajectory, and like your ability to make a tangible impact relies entirely on what they called human engineering.
Which completely shatters the illusion of how we measure competence, I mean, we operate in these systems, corporate, academic, even social systems, that aggressively optimize for that 15%.
We test for it constantly.
We test for it, we interview for it, we promote based on it. Yet when you look at who actually scales organizations, who commands the respect of their community, and who drives lasting change, it is invariably the people who have mastered that other 85%.
Yeah, the human engineering part.
Right. Human engineering is, it's your personality. It's your ability to lead. It is the really complex, nuanced art of how you interact with other human beings.
And that is exactly what we're decoding today. Yeah. We're diving deep into the ultimate playbook for that 85%, which is drawn from Dale Carnegie's legendary 1937 framework, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
A classic.
An absolute classic. So for you listening, whether you're managing a global remote team, navigating a complex marriage, or, just trying to get your kids out the door in the morning, consider this your masterclass in human behavior.
I love that.
But, okay, I do have to point out the elephant in the room right up front. 1937 was a radically different world.
That is very true.
We're talking about an era way before globalized digital communication, before smartphones, before asynchronous remote work. So how does a framework rooted in the Great Depression survive in an era of Slack channels and Zoom fatigue?
Well, it survives because while our technological landscape has completely transformed, our neurological architecture really hasn't changed at all.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamental operating system of the human animal, our ego, our deep-seated biological desires, our psychological defense mechanisms, it is exactly the same today as it was in 1937.
Or 1937 BC, probably.
Exactly. Carnegie wasn't just drafting some, temporary manual on office etiquette. He was cataloging the immutable laws of human nature. Our brains are still totally wired for tribal connection, status preservation, and threat detection.
So the medium changes, but the primate typing the email is exactly the same.
What's a perfect way to put it? Yeah.
All right, let's get right into the foundational rule of this entire framework, because this just hits you right between the eyes. It's deceptively simple, but incredibly difficult to execute. And it's this: don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
It sounds like a cross-stitch pillow you'd find in a grandmother's living room, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does sound a bit cliche at first.
But when you actually examine the neurobiology and the psychology behind it, avoiding criticism is a profound behavioral hack. Criticism is futile because it immediately puts a person on the defensive. It triggers the amygdala.
It sets off the alarms.
Exactly.
Right.
The moment you criticize someone, their brain does not process it as a helpful logical correction. It processes it as an existential threat to their status and identity.
And to illustrate this, the examples Carnegie used of this cognitive dissonance are just mind-blowing. Let's talk about Two-Gun Crowley.
Oh, this is such a crazy story.
It's wild. So this guy was a ruthless killer in the 1930s. And the historical record describes this unbelievable scene in New York City. You have 150 police officers surrounding his apartment.
A literal army.
Right. They're shooting through the roof. They're deploying tear gas. Crowley is literally pinned down, bleeding from multiple gunshot wounds. And in the middle of all this chaos, he writes a letter.
A letter that perfectly encapsulates the absolute delusion of the human ego.
Yes. He writes, under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm.
Which is just astonishing.
I mean, this is a man who just days prior shot a police officer dead at point-blank range simply for asking to see his driver's license.
It really highlights how far the ego will go to protect itself.
And it's not just him. Look at Al Capone, the kingpin of the Chicago mob. He orchestrated massacres, ran this massive criminal empire, and yet Capone genuinely viewed himself as an unappreciated public benefactor.
Yeah, he thought he was a good guy.
He honestly believed he was providing a service to the people and was just misunderstood by a tyrannical government. And then you have Albert Fall, the Secretary of the Interior, responsible for the infamous Teapot Dome scandal.
One of the greatest betrayals of public trust in American history.
Exactly. And he blamed everyone but himself. His wife even famously defended him, claiming he was a martyr who had been betrayed.
We really have to pause and absorb the magnitude of that psychological reality,
Yeah, that's deep.
If the most notorious, objectively guilty figures in modern history are entirely blind to their own faults, if their brains will literally rewrite reality to preserve their own self-righteousness, how on earth do we expect our coworkers, our partners, or our children to react to our daily minor criticisms?
That's such a good point. I mean, if Al Capone's brain won't let him admit he's the bad guy, the guy in accounting who accidentally deleted the shared drive definitely thinks he's a saint who was set up by a faulty software update.
Precisely. And B.F. Skinner, the pioneering psychologist, mapped this out brilliantly through operant conditioning.
Oh, right, with the animal studies.
Yeah, he demonstrated empirically that animals rewarded for good behavior learn significantly faster, and they retain that learning far more effectively than animals punished for bad behavior.
And that translates to humans, too.
100%. Subsequent behavioral studies have mapped this directly onto human psychology. Negative reinforcement like criticism does not create lasting behavioral change. It just breeds resentment.
It makes people dig their heels in.
Exactly. It forces the recipient to invest all their cognitive energy into defending their actions rather than, actually correcting them.
But hold on, let me push back here a little bit, because I completely understand not nagging your partner about loading the dishwasher wrong. That's obvious.
Sure.
But what about in a modern corporate setting with strict compliance laws, say cybersecurity or aviation or medicine? You can't just not criticize an employee who makes a critical error.
It feels counterintuitive, yeah.
I mean, if an engineer leaves a server completely vulnerable to a massive data breach, the stakes are just too high to smile and be agreeable. How does this framework survive in high liability environments where correction is literally a matter of life and death?
That is the exact crucible where this principle is actually most crucial.
Wait.
Yeah. When the stakes are life and death, criticism is actually the most dangerous tool you can use because it destroys psychological safety.
Okay, well, walk me through that.
Look at the historical account of Bob Hoover, who was a highly decorated test pilot. So Hoover was flying this World War II-era propeller plane at an air show. He's up in the air performing all these maneuvers, and suddenly both engines completely fail.
Oh, wow. That's terrifying.
It is. But through sheer technical brilliance, he manages a miraculous crash landing. The aircraft is destroyed, but he and his passengers actually survive.
The ultimate high liability scenario.
Exactly. And when Hoover inspects the wreckage, he discovers the root cause. The young mechanic at the airport had accidentally filled this vintage propeller plane with jet fuel. Yeah, it was an act of pure negligence that almost resulted in multiple fatalities.
So Hoover has every right to just completely destroy this mechanic's career, right?
Yeah.
To scream, to berate him, to demand his immediate termination.
That is the natural, ego-driven instinct. And Hoover finds the mechanic, and the young man is just in agony. He is weeping, paralyzed by fear and guilt. He fully knows what he did.
Yeah, he doesn't need it pointed out to him.
Right. Now, what would screaming at him accomplish? It would trigger severe trauma, panic, and defensiveness. Instead, Hoover bypasses the ego's armor entirely.
What did he do?
He walks up, puts his arm around the weeping mechanic, and says, "To show you I'm sure that you'll never do this again, I want you to service my F-51 tomorrow."
Wow. That is the ultimate test of ego suspension.
Isn't it incredible?
Yeah, Hoover realized in a fraction of a second that screaming wouldn't fix the broken plane, but it would completely destroy the psychological safety of his maintenance crew.
Hoover recognized a fundamental truth. The mechanic already knew he was wrong. The learning had already occurred. Criticism at that point is merely the punisher indulging their own anger.
So by offering grace instead of condemnation, Hoover ensured that mechanic would be the most meticulous, hypervigilant worker on the tarmac for the rest of his life.
Precisely. He corrected the behavior by elevating the man's responsibility, not by crushing his spirit.
Okay, so if criticism is this biologically flawed mechanism for motivating people, if it actively backfires, We have to identify the mechanism that actually drives human behavior.
And this leads us to what philosophers and psychologists have identified as the deepest, most insatiable craving in human nature.
This is where we pivot from defensive human relations to proactive human relations.
Exactly.
We look at Sigmund Freud, who theorized that the core driver of human action is the desire to be great. And we look at John Dewey, one of the most profound philosophers of education, who argued that the deepest urge in human nature is the desire to be important.
The wording there is so critical. It is a craving, not just a mere wish. It is a biological imperative.
Like hunger.
Yes. Animals desire food, sleep, and physical safety. Humans desire those baselines as well, obviously. But once those are met, we are consumed by this burning, relentless need for significance. It is the defining differentiator of the human species.
It's the exact drive that pushed an impoverished, uneducated Abraham Lincoln to study law books he found at the bottom of a barrel of household junk.
Right.
And it's the psychological engine behind our obsession with status symbols today. I mean, why do people buy houses with 5 empty bedrooms? Why do they lease luxury cars they can barely afford?
Or constantly curate our lives on social media.
Exactly. It's all a desperate bid for that feeling of importance.
And we cannot afford to judge that drive as shallow, We have to recognize it as a fundamental neurological reality. In fact, the psychiatric data on this is staggering.
Yeah, the stuff about the psychiatric wards really stood out to me.
It's so profound. When the real world completely denies a person this feeling of importance, when their reality is so devoid of significance that their ego literally cannot survive, their brain will fracture reality to protect them.
Just invent a new one.
Yes. Psychiatrists report that a significant portion of patients who suffer psychotic breaks and retreat into severe delusions do so specifically to find the importance that reality denied them.
That is wild.
Their brain constructs this elaborate fantasy where they are a secret agent or a misunderstood genius or a historical monarch just to fulfill that craving.
That is chilling. I mean, if the human brain will literally sever its connection to reality just to feel important, imagine the intense loyalty and motivation you can unlock if you genuinely provide that feeling to the people around you in the real world.
Which introduces the single most effective tool for human engineering, which is sincere appreciation. But we really have to draw a stark, impenetrable line here between sincere appreciation and cheap flattery.
Right, because people can smell flattery a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at the career of Charles Schwab. This was a man operating in the brutal, physically demanding, highly unionized world of the early 1900s steel industry.
Not exactly a sensitive environment.
No, not at all. And Andrew Carnegie paid him $1 million salary, which in an era before income tax was just an astronomical sum, specifically to run the United States Steel Company. Was Schwab the foremost technical expert on the metallurgical properties of steel?
Schwab openly admitted he was not. He had men working under him who understood the thermodynamics and the chemistry of steel manufacturing way better than he ever would.
So Schwab's $1 million superpower was his mastery of that 85% we talked about.
Yes, his human engineering.
He understood the psychological economy of his workforce. He stated clearly that his greatest asset was his ability to arouse enthusiasm among his men through appreciation and encouragement.
In an era where management was defined by authoritative cruelty and constant criticism, Schwab led through positive reinforcement.
He famously said, "If I like anything, I am hearty in my approbation and lavish in my praise."
But the mechanism of his praise is what made it effective. Like we were saying, flattery is shallow, manipulative, and selfish. It comes from the teeth out.
It's transactional.
Very. Flattery is simply telling the other person exactly what they already think about themselves or what you want them to hear so you can extract a favor. Sincere appreciation, however, requires cognitive effort.
You actually have to pay attention.
You do. It requires you to step outside yourself, observe the other person deeply, and find a truth about them that is genuinely worthy of elevation. It comes from the heart out.
So flattery is like counterfeit money. You might be able to pass it off once to a cashier who isn't paying attention, but eventually you're going to get caught. And when you do, it completely devalues the real currency.
That's a great analogy.
If you become known as a flatterer in your organization, even your genuine praise becomes mathematically worthless because your underlying intent is suspect.
But genuine appreciation can literally rewire a person's self-concept.
Take the remarkable childhood story of Stephen Morris. He was a young boy, completely blind, navigating a world that constantly reminded him of his deficit.
You can imagine the profound isolation and the lack of importance forced upon him.
Yeah. And one day in his classroom, a teacher named Mr. Steplight encountered a problem. A mouse had escaped and was hiding somewhere in the room.
Now, a typical teacher might have just asked the sighted children to look for it. But Mr. Steplight utilized profound human engineering.
He asked Stevlin to help. He told the boy that nature had given him something no one else in that room possessed. An incredibly sensitive, finely tuned pair of ears.
He genuinely appreciated the boy's unique auditory gift and asked him to use it to locate the mouse.
And Stevlin Morris, who the world would come to know as Stevie Wonder, later reflected that this specific act of sincere appreciation changed the entire trajectory of his life.
Let's really unpack the cognitive reframing that teacher achieved there. Mr. Steplight didn't offer empty flattery like, you're just as good as the sighted kids. He didn't offer pity.
No, he found a real advantage.
He identified a genuine biological reality, Stevie's heightened hearing, and elevated it from a compensatory mechanism into a unique, powerful advantage. It was the first time Stevie's blindness was framed not as a lack of ability, but as the exact reason he was important.
Wow.
And when you realize that every single person you interact with is starving for that exact kind of validation, you stop trying to force them to bend to your will, and you start aligning what you need with what makes them feel significant.
And that psychological alignment is the perfect bridge into our next core concept.
Yeah.
Because once you understand the biology of what people crave, you have to engineer your communication to offer it to them.
Right.
It's the principle of arousing an eager want. Or, as the metaphor goes, baiting the hook to suit the fish.
It is the ultimate test of empathy. I mean, when you go fishing, you do not bait your hook with strawberries and cream simply because you prefer the taste of strawberries and cream.
But the fish don't care about your preferences.
Exactly. You bait the hook with a worm because that is what the fish desires. Yet, in our professional and personal lives, 99% of our communication is strawberries and cream.
We just talk about what we want.
We write emails, we make pitches, we argue with our spouses based entirely on what we want.
There's this brilliant, almost slapstick historical anecdote involving Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great American philosopher.
I love this story.
Emerson and his son are trying to get a stubborn calf into a barn. Emerson is pushing the calf from behind. His son is pulling the halter from the front. They're sweating, slipping in the mud, utterly failing. Why? Because the great philosopher is trapped in his own perspective.
Completely proud.
He is only broadcasting his desire, get in the barn. And the calf is doing the exact same thing, planting its hooves, stiffening its legs, broadcasting its desire, stay out of the barn.
Two competing egos locked in a battle of force.
Yep. And then a Jewish housemaid walks by. She hasn't published essays on transcendentalism, but she intuitively understands behavioral psychology. What does she do?
She simply puts her finger into the calf's mouth. She lets the calf suckle her finger, and as it does, she gently, effortlessly leads it right into the barn.
It's so simple.
She thought about what the calf actually wanted, maternal comfort, feeding, and aligned her goal with the animal's natural drive.
Henry Ford articulated this mechanism perfectly. He said, if there is any one secret of success, it lies in the ability to get the other person's point of view and see things from that person's angle as well as from your own.
You have to merge your objective with their intrinsic motivation.
Look at how Andrew Carnegie applied this. Carnegie had two nephews away at Yale who were completely ignoring their mother's frantic letters. She was worried sick.
Classic college kids.
Right. So Carnegie bets $100 that he can get these college kids to reply by return mail without once asking them for a response. He writes them a standard, chatty letter about his life, and at the very bottom adds a quick postscript. P.S. I'm enclosing a $5 bill for each of you.
But the genius is in the omission. He deliberately folds the letter and mails it without putting the money inside.
The nephews instantly write back. They thank him for the wonderful letter and naturally inform him that the money was missing.
So smart.
Carnegie didn't lecture them on filial piety or guilt-trip them about their mother's anxiety. He baited the hook with a college student's most eager want: cash.
Or take the father whose little boy aggressively refused to eat his vegetables. The father stopped lecturing the kid about vitamins and long-term cellular health, which a kid does not care about.
No, not at all.
He noticed the boy was terrified of a larger bully in the neighborhood. So the father explained that eating the vegetables would accelerate his growth, making him big enough and strong enough to finally defeat the bully. The boy started eating spinach like he was training for the Olympics.
We hear these anecdotes and logically we nod. It seems so obvious. But we have to ask ourselves, if this is demonstrably how human beings operate, why do we fail at this so consistently?
It's a great question.
You might be listening to this right now thinking about an email you just drafted to a client or a text you just sent to a contractor. If we know the Emerson calf story, why is our default setting so profoundly selfish?
Because overriding our own perspective requires immense metabolic and psychological energy.
It's tiring.
It is. Our own immediate needs, our own anxieties are incredibly loud in our brains. The needs of others are silent. It takes deliberate, conscious exertion to suppress your own ego and inhabit someone else's mental framework.
And the difference between those who exert that energy and those who don't is just staggering. Let's look at the two letters analyzed in our material.
Yes, this contrast is a masterclass in copywriting and persuasion.
First, you have a letter written by a radio station manager to top advertising agencies.
Yeah.
The letter is entirely self-referential. It says things like, we want to be the biggest station. We want our ad revenue to grow. We require you to put us on your preferred list.
It is a barrage of the pronouns I, me, my, we, our.
Exactly. Yeah. Now, analyze the psychological state of the recipient. The advertising executive reading that letter is stressed about their own mortgage, their own quarterly metrics, their own demanding clients.
So they read the station manager's letter, and their brain immediately registers it as irrelevant noise. They're thinking, I do not care what you want. Why are you demanding I solve your problems when I have my own?
Now, contrast that friction with a letter written by a woman named Mrs. Anderson. She was a bank employee in New York who desperately needed to relocate to Phoenix for her son's health. She had to secure a job in a new city during a tough economic climate.
High stakes.
Very high. She wrote to 12 banks in Phoenix. But she did not write, I am a desperate mother who needs a job because my son is sick and I really want to live in your beautiful city.
If she had, she would have received 12 very polite rejections.
Exactly. Instead, her letter focused entirely on the banks. She systematically outlined her 10 years of highly specialized experience in banking operations. She explicitly detailed how her specific knowledge of modern clearinghouse techniques could immediately increase their operational efficiency and drive up their profit margins.
Brilliant.
She presented herself not as a burden seeking a favor, but as a highly calibrated solution to their most pressing corporate problems.
She aroused an eager want. She translated her need into their language of profit and efficiency.
And the response rate. Out of the 12 banks she mailed, 11 of them immediately invited her for an interview.
That is a 91% conversion rate on a cold outreach.
Because she didn't ask for a handout. She offered a clear, undeniable benefit. When you shift your communication to focus entirely on the other person's matrix of desires, you transcend transactional interactions. You trigger genuine connection.
Which leads us nicely into the granular mechanics of likability.
Let's dissect that. Because if you have stopped criticizing and you are starting to frame your requests around what others want, you have established a really solid functional baseline. But there is a secondary layer of pure magnetic likability that some people just seem to wield effortlessly.
Right, and we usually dismiss it as natural charisma, but the behavioral analysis breaks it down into actionable, repeatable mechanics.
And we can understand the core of this by observing the ultimate master of likability, the dog.
Oh, this is so true. A hen must labor to lay eggs. A cow must produce milk. A horse must pull a plow. A dog is the only animal that makes a living entirely without producing physical labor.
A dog survives and thrives purely by providing unconditional positive regard and genuine, unbridled interest in you.
Think about it. When you walk through your front door after a brutal day, a dog doesn't sit on the couch checking its phone and give you a half-hearted nod.
No, it loses its mind with joy simply because you exist in its presence. We are evolutionarily wired to respond to that level of focused attention.
And we desperately need it because human beings are deeply, tragically obsessed with themselves. The New York Telephone Company conducted a massive linguistic study of telephone conversations to identify the most frequently used word in the English language.
Let me guess, it wasn't love or money or help.
No, it was the personal pronoun I, used 3,900 times in 500 conversations. I did this, I need that, my car, my job.
Which presents a massive strategic advantage for you. If everyone else is obsessively broadcasting their own internal monologue, the quickest way to become wildly likable is to simply stop broadcasting and start receiving.
Exactly. If you try to impress people by talking about your own accomplishments, you might generate envy, but you will not generate affection. But if you become genuinely interested in them, if you ask them questions about their lives, you bypass their defense instantly.
It's like trying to airdrop a massive file to someone whose Bluetooth is turned off. You can have the most important, brilliant data in the world, but until you sync with their psychological receiver, until you validate their ego by taking an interest in them, the transfer will just keep failing.
That's a great way to think about it.
And the two most powerful tools for turning on their Bluetooth receiver are the physical act of smiling and the auditory anchor of their name.
Let's analyze the smile, because we really must differentiate between a genuine smile and a manipulative smirk. Human beings possess highly evolved facial recognition hardware. We instantly detect the microexpressions of a fake plastic smile, and our amygdala processes it as deceitful and threatening.
We're talking about the Duchenne smile, right? A genuine smile that engages the orbicularis oculi muscle around the eyes.
Yes, the eye crinkle.
But practically speaking, what if you are exhausted? What if you're having a terrible day, your commute was a nightmare, and you simply do not feel the emotion of happiness required to produce a genuine smile?
This is where the work of pioneering psychologist William James becomes essential. James proposed a radical inversion of how we understand emotion. We traditionally assume that emotion dictates action, right? We feel happy. Therefore, our facial muscles contract into a smile.
Makes sense.
But James, and later research into the facial feedback hypothesis, proved that action and feeling actually operate in a bidirectional loop. Because our physical actions are far more subject to our direct conscious control than our emotions are, we can actually regulate our internal emotional state by manually regulating our physical actions.
So you literally reverse engineer the neurochemistry.
Exactly. If you force your zygomatic major muscles to contract into a smile, that physical action sends sensory feedback to the brain, which begins to trigger the release of serotonin and dopamine. By acting as if you are happy, you physiologically prime your brain to experience happiness.
So fake it till you make it isn't just motivational fluff, it is a neurological mechanism.
It is hard science.
Now, pair that physical warmth with the psychological anchor we mentioned. A person's name. A person's name is the core signifier of their identity. To them, it is the sweetest, most important sound in any language.
Look at the political dominance of Jim Farley. He was the campaign manager who essentially orchestrated Franklin D. Roosevelt's ascent to the presidency. Farley grew up in poverty, his father died when he was young, and he never attended high school. Yet, at the height of his career, he could call 50,000 people by their first names.
50,000. That's not a memory trick. That is a systematic prioritization of human dignity.
It really is. Farley built an incredible mental infrastructure. Whenever he met someone, he would discreetly ascertain their full name, their family dynamic, their profession, and their political leanings.
And he'd lock that data into his mind. And years later, he could walk up to a local organizer in a crowded hall, shake his hand, call him by his first name, and ask how his daughter's college classes were going. That level of specific, targeted recall breeds absolute fanatical loyalty.
It is the ultimate validation of existence. Andrew Carnegie used this exact psychological lever to win one of the most lucrative railroad contracts in American history.
Oh, the Pullman story.
Yes. Carnegie was locked in a brutal, margin-destroying price war with George Pullman for the sleeping car business of the Union Pacific Railroad. Both companies were bleeding cash just to undercut each other. Finally, Carnegie orchestrates a chance meeting with Pullman at the St. Nicholas Hotel in New York.
And Carnegie bluntly suggests they stop destroying each other and merge their massive operations.
Pullman is intrigued, but his ego is highly defensive. He asks the ultimate power question: what would you call the new company?
Carnegie doesn't hesitate for a microsecond. He looks Pullman in the eye and says, why, the Pullman Palace Car Company, of course.
And in that instant, the war was over. Carnegie conceded the name, but he won the monopoly. He understood that Pullman's desire for legacy, his desire to see his name immortalized in steel and commerce, was far more powerful than any argument over revenue splits.
And this likability translates directly to the bottom line. Look at William Steinhardt, a veteran Wall Street stockbroker. He was notorious for being a high-stress, grumpy fixture in the office.
Not exactly a people person.
No. But after studying these behavioral principles, he committed to an experiment. He would actively smile and use names for 1 week. He smiled at his wife. He greeted the building's elevator operator by name with a massive smile. He smiled at the subway booth attendant. He projected warmth to traders on the floor who had never seen his teeth in 20 years.
He weaponized emotional contagion.
Yes, and the results were immediate and quantifiable. The friction in his daily life evaporated. But more importantly for a Wall Street broker, he reported that this specific behavioral shift actively brought in more revenue.
It's amazing.
His clients and colleagues simply preferred interacting with him, which led to smoother negotiations and more deal flow.
Likability is not genetic destiny. It is a trainable skill set. You project genuine interest, you regulate your neurochemistry with a smile, and you validate identity through names.
Okay, so let's pressure test this. We've established a baseline.
Mm-hmm.
No criticism, align with their wants, smile, use their name. But human interaction is inherently messy. What happens when you inevitably hit a wall of disagreement?
Because you will.
Exactly. Let's say you're in a boardroom, you've smiled, you've used their name, but they just pitched an operational strategy that is objectively, mathematically disastrous.
Yeah.
How do you win them over to your way of thinking without sparking an ego war? Because you can't just nod and smile at a terrible idea.
This is where we cross from basic rapport into the gentle art of persuasion. And the foundational premise here is a bitter pill for highly analytical people to swallow. The premise is you cannot win an argument.
That drives analytical people crazy. I mean, if I have the data, if the spreadsheet proves my strategy is right and yours is wrong, why can't I just lay out the facts definitively, win the argument, and move on?
Because human beings are not logic processing machines. We are emotion processing machines that occasionally use logic to justify our feelings.
That's a huge distinction.
If you unleash a barrage of facts that definitively proves someone wrong, you may win the intellectual skirmish, but you inflict a fatal wound to their pride. You humiliate them. And a person convinced against their will is of the exact same opinion still.
They just dig in deeper.
They will privately harbor immense resentment, and they will subconsciously sabotage the implementation of your correct idea just to reassert their own autonomy.
This reminds me of Benjamin Franklin's early struggles. In his youth in Philadelphia, Franklin was an absolute intellectual powerhouse, but he was socially radioactive. He was a combative know-it-all.
Which is so common with brilliant people.
It is. He would aggressively dismantle anyone's logic who disagreed with him. Finally, an older, wiser Quaker friend pulled him aside and delivered a brutal intervention. He basically told Franklin, "Ben, your brilliance is making you impossible to be around. You slap down anyone who challenges you. As a result, people are terrified to share ideas with you, which means your learning has stagnated. You are trapped in your own arrogance."
It was a moment of profound crisis for Franklin, but he possessed what psychologists call epistemic humility. He realized his desire to be right was destroying his ability to be effective, so he initiated a strict mechanical change to his linguistic habits.
He went through his vocabulary and surgically removed all words of fixed, dogmatic opinion. He banned himself from saying words like certainly, undoubtedly, or always.
And he replaced them with phrases that indicated intellectual flexibility, like I conceive, I apprehend, or I imagine it to be so.
Think about the rhetorical judo of that shift. If you say to a colleague, your projections are completely wrong, you are throwing down a gauntlet. You activate their fight or flight response.
But if you say, I may be misinterpreting this data, but it looks to me like these projections might be off, can we look at it together? You instantly disarm them. Who can argue with a person who proactively admits their own fallibility? You bypass their defensive perimeter entirely.
And this pairs beautifully with the psychological momentum of the Socratic method. Socrates didn't walk through Athens telling people they were idiots. He guided them to new conclusions by asking a series of highly calibrated questions. Specifically questions that the opponent was forced to agree with.
The neuromuscular dynamics of the yes response are fascinating. When a human being says no and genuinely means it, their body physically prepares for conflict. Their vocal cords tighten, the endocrine system releases cortisol, and the entire neuromuscular network goes into a state of rigid withdrawal. The organism is physically rejecting the incoming data.
But when you engineer the conversation so they say yes, even to small, seemingly insignificant points, none of that defensive cascade occurs. The organism remains open, forward-moving, and receptive.
Therefore, the absolute worst way to begin a negotiation or a debate is by immediately highlighting the area of disagreement. You must start by establishing a massive foundation of agreement.
Emphasize that you are both striving for the exact same overarching goal and that the current disagreement is merely a minor tactical difference. Secure as many yeses as possible early on to build psychological momentum toward your ultimate proposal.
But what about pure, unadulterated anger?
Oh, let's escalate the scenario.
Yeah, let's say you aren't in a polite debate. You are dealing with an irate client who lost money or a spouse who is completely fed up. They are screaming, their face is red. You cannot logically deploy the Socratic method when the person across from you is experiencing an amygdala hijack.
That's very true.
When a person is consumed by rage, their prefrontal cortex, the logical processing center of the brain, is effectively offline. Logic is utterly useless against raw emotion. What an angry person is actually demanding beneath the volume and the insults is validation. They want their emotional state to be acknowledged and justified.
And there is a specific, highly engineered phrase provided in our historical analysis that acts like a kill switch for anger. If you are listening right now, memorize this phrase. When someone is verbally attacking you, look at them calmly and say, "I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do."
It is linguistic magic because it is a statement that is fundamentally impossible to argue against.
Right, because you aren't actually conceding that their facts are correct. You are validating their emotional reality. You are saying, given your unique background, your current stress levels, and the specific information you possess right now, your reaction is a 100% logical response.
It acts like water on a grease fire. The hostility evaporates because you have removed the resistance. People desperately crave sympathy for their perceived injustices. Once you provide that sympathy, the anger loses its fuel, and the prefrontal cortex slowly comes back online, allowing for actual problem solving.
This brings us to the final, and really the most difficult, frontier of human engineering. We know how to diffuse anger, we know how to persuade, we know how to project likability, but ultimately, true leadership requires correction.
It does. Sometimes people actively fail.
Sometimes a subordinate is chronically underperforming, or a child is acting out in the way that must be stopped. How do you intervene and correct bad behavior without triggering that defensive cascade we talked about? How do you change someone while allowing them to save face?
This is the synthesis of everything we've discussed. It requires immense cognitive control to correct without condemning. And the easiest way to fail at this is through blunt, direct confrontation.
Let's examine how President William McKinley handled this during a highly contentious political campaign. McKinley had a prominent, wealthy supporter who fancied himself a great political mind. The supporter wrote a campaign speech for McKinley and proudly read it aloud to the president.
Now, McKinley possessed the political acumen to instantly recognize that this speech was an absolute disaster. If he delivered it, it would alienate voters, cause a massive scandal, and derail the campaign.
But McKinley faces a dual threat. If he accepts the speech, he ruins the campaign. If he bluntly tells the supporter the speech is garbage, he humiliates a powerful ally and loses vital funding.
So McKinley deploys what we can call the Novocaine of praise.
I love that phrase.
It's perfect, right? You never start drilling into the cavity of a mistake without first numbing the ego with genuine validation. McKinley looks at the supporter and says, "My friend, that is a splendid speech, a magnificent speech. No one could have prepared a better one. There are many occasions on which it would be exactly the right thing to say, but is it quite suitable to this particular occasion?"
Notice the structural brilliance of that response. He validates the man's intellect and effort. He praises the prose. And then he gently reframes the rejection not as a failure of the author, but merely as a situational mismatch.
He preserves the man's status while completely discarding his terrible idea. McKinley then sat down and helped the man write a completely different speech. The supporter left feeling vital and respected, despite the fact that his original work was entirely scrapped.
But there's a massive linguistic trap hidden in how most of us try to apply that Novocaine. And it revolves around one specific, dangerous word, but.
We are all guilty of this. We attempt to use praise to soften the blow of criticism, but we hinge the two clauses with the word but. For example, a parent might say to a teenager, "We are so proud of you for bringing up your English grades this semester, but if you had worked harder in algebra, your overall GPA would be much better."
The millisecond that teenager hears the word but, the entire physiological effect of the praise is obliterated.
He's totally wiped out.
The brain instantly recognizes the praise was merely manipulative framing, a Trojan horse designed to deliver the criticism. The word but acts as a cognitive eraser for everything positive that preceded it.
The structural fix is incredibly simple, yet profoundly effective. You replace the word but with the word and.
Let's replay the scenario. We are so proud of you for bringing up your English grades this semester, and if you continue to apply this same earnest effort next term, we know your algebra grade will catch up.
The psychological difference is night and day. In the second phrasing, you are taking the momentum of their success and projecting it forward into an expectation for the future. You are not contrasting their success with their failure. You are linking their proven capability to a new challenge. You are allowing them to save face.
This concept of saving face is the ultimate organizational superpower. Look at how General Electric handled one of the most brilliant yet problematic minds in their history. Charles Steinmetz was an absolute genius in the field of electrical engineering. He was invaluable to GE.
But they had placed him as the head of the calculating department, and he was an abysmal manager. He lacked every ounce of the human engineering we've been discussing. The department was chaotic, and GE desperately needed to remove him from management.
But if they demote him, or call him into HR and bluntly state he lacks leadership skills, they risk deeply offending a volatile genius and potentially losing him to a competitor.
So they engaged in profound organizational empathy. They did not demote him. Instead, they created a completely new, highly prestigious-sounding title specifically for him, Consulting Engineer of the General Electric Company.
It was a bespoke title that essentially meant he would continue doing the exact same high-level mathematical engineering he was already doing, but they quietly moved someone else in to manage the department.
Steinmetz was absolutely thrilled. His ego was not just preserved, it was elevated. GE solved their operational crisis without spilling a drop of bad blood. They let him save face.
It is a masterclass in separating the ego from the objective. And this leads to our final behavioral lever, the Pygmalion effect, or giving a person a fine reputation to live up to.
Let's bring this down to a relatable, everyday management scenario. You run a garage, and you have a mechanic who has been a top performer for years. But over the last few months, his work has gotten sloppy. He's missing deadlines, leaving tools around.
The standard approach is to call him in, outline his failures, write him up, and threaten his job.
Which triggers the defensive cascade, breeds resentment, and often leads to the employee consciously fulfilling that negative expectation by caring even less.
Instead, the manager calls him in and utilizes his task success. The manager says, "You are a hell of a mechanic. You've been doing elite-level work in this shop for years, and you are a pillar of this team. But recently, the time it's taking you to finish jobs has slipped. Now, I know you aren't happy with that because I know the incredibly high standard you hold yourself to. Let's figure out what's blocking you so we can get you back to the level of excellence we both know you're capable of."
Look at the psychological anchor the manager just deployed. By explicitly referencing the mechanic's past excellence, the manager forces the mechanic to identify with success, not failure.
If you tell someone they are lazy and incompetent, their brain will eventually adopt that identity.
Exactly. But if you frame their failure as a temporary aberration from their true identity as a top-tier professional, their own pride will compel them to aggressively self-correct. You are giving them a reputation to live up to, rather than a failure to live down.
So as we pull all these threads together, from the neurological failures of criticism to the facial feedback hypothesis of smiling, to the Socratic method of persuasion, what is the grand unifying theory of human relations?
It fundamentally boils down to the strenuous, unnatural, yet extraordinarily rewarding work of ego suspension. Every major relational catastrophe highlighted today, the raging arguments, the self-centered emails, the catastrophic corporate demotions, stems from an individual prioritizing their own immediate emotional release over the actual outcome they desire.
Effective human engineering requires strategic empathy. You must constantly subordinate your primitive desire to be right to your higher-order desire to be effective.
And let's be honest, that takes immense discipline. In the heat of the moment, it feels infinitely better to just vent, to send the blistering email, to bluntly tell someone exactly why their idea is stupid. It provides a quick hit of dopamine.
But what the historical and psychological data proves is that indulging that ego hit is the path of most resistance. It creates enemies, it stalls organizational velocity, and it makes every subsequent interaction exponentially harder. The hard way, the path of perspective-taking, genuine appreciation, and face-saving is actually the ultimate cheat code to getting what you want out of life.
I want to leave the listener with a final provocative thought regarding the context of these principles. We have been decoding a psychological framework formalized in 1937, but contrast that era with the reality we navigate today.
It's a completely different landscape.
We live in an ecosystem of infinite, frictionless digital communication. We are submerged in rapid-fire texts, public social media comments, and anonymous corporate feedback loops. Our entire technological infrastructure is aggressively optimized for knee-jerk reactions, outrage, and ego-driven broadcast.
It has never been easier to instantly transmit our criticisms, our demands, and our I statements to the world.
Exactly. If the ability to suspend one's ego and demonstrate genuine, focused empathy was considered a rare and magical superpower during the Great Depression, imagine the absolute, unparalleled asymmetric advantage it represents today.
Wow.
Imagine the profound impact you can generate if you simply put down your device, look a human being in the eye, and sincerely make them feel important in a world that is constantly reducing them to an algorithm.
That is the ultimate differentiator. In a world drowning in digital noise, genuine human engineering is the rarest commodity. So, if you are listening right now, here is your practical application. Do not try to overhaul your entire personality by tomorrow morning. Pick exactly one principle we discussed.
Just one.
Maybe it's catching yourself before you send that critical Slack message and rewriting it without the word but. Maybe it's physically forcing a genuine smile during your next stressful Zoom call to trigger that emotional contagion. Or maybe it's taking 2 minutes to identify a sincere, highly specific trait you appreciate in your partner and telling them.
Execute just one of these psychological levers and observe the immediate shift in the dynamic.
Human behavior can often feel like an unpredictable, irrational storm. But the moment you possess the discipline to look through the other person's eyes, the path forward becomes perfectly clear. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.